Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, November 10th, 2020. I'm here with Mike Carr. Mike is the CEO of Bitterroot Resources. I've been a shareholder of Bitterroot, greater and lesser amounts, for quite a while. I've bought past placements. Mike and I have known each other a long time. Mike and my brother Dave, my late brother Dave, go back almost 40 years. And one of the things, Bitterroot's been around for quite a while. It's worked on several things, but the current focus is sort of I guess you could call it a subset. I would call it that anyway, of their Michigan Peninsula project. And the Upper Peninsula project is focused on nickel copper PGM deposits. Mike put out some drill results, I don't know, a month and a half ago, give or take. And I'd sort of been interested in this project before, but I didn't, I was kind of waiting to see something a little more. I mean, I could get my head around the target and it seemed to make sense. Mike JV'd the project and he put a few holes into it a couple of months ago. And when you look at those holes in their entirety, it's not that there's like this boomer drill hole. There is one pretty good drill hole, like it's a good drill hole as a start for this type of project, but it was more when you put it together holistically and looked at the target, now that these holes are in it, I just think the risk reward is a lot better. The market's not paying up for that. Mike is doing a financing. I believe it's 6 cents, half more at 12 for 2 years. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
And I'm buying some of that because I just look at this in a company that's got a $3 million market cap, and I know how rare copper nickel discoveries are. They don't happen very often, and if you're lucky enough to find a high grade one, the market tends to react quite strongly to it. So I like the risk reward. I like Mike. Mike's not a guy that ever, he's a penny pincher. He doesn't waste any dollars. He's raising enough money to do what he needs to do in this project and 2 others. But I think this project LM is kind of it's the one that would move the needle in the next few months at least. So can you kind of walk us through? I mean, you got a long, if this works out in the next drill phase, it's going to be I don't know what, 25-year overnight success, something like that. I mean, you've had some focus on this area for quite a long time. Can you kind of give us a snapshot of the history and how you got to where you are now with this project, and why this project? Why did you drill here?
Sure. Well, I first incorporated a Michigan subsidiary just about 25 years ago to the day. So in 1995, I'd been down there to look at a copper project that's now in another company, but we didn't move on the copper project. But I was introduced to some guys that had an idea that was like Voisey's Bay, because the Voisey's Bay discovery had just happened in the previous year or two, and there was a great appetite for nickel copper exploration stories at that time. I'd also come across a research paper published in Economic Geology by Tony Naldrit, who had identified the Mid-Continent Rift area, which this property is in, as being an area where you could expect to find Norilsk-type conduit-hosted magmatic nickel copper sulfide deposits. So it had the big picture regional geology. There were some specific targets that were, you could point a drill rig at, and it also has great access, lots of roads everywhere, infrastructure, and a long history of mining in that part of the world, with the copper mines in the Keweenaw Peninsula. That was the biggest source of copper in the United States up until the early 60s. And also the iron ore mines in the Marquette Trough, where Cleveland Cliffs is still operating today after over 100 years. So, there, obviously that mining, it hasn't been as prevalent in the economy as it was in the past, but certainly lots of history there for mining, and also large ore bodies. So that was what got me interested, and we ended up acquiring 2 large land positions there, 100 square miles of mineral rights from copper range company in the Keweenaw Peninsula, which was strictly copper, and another 250 square miles of mineral rights by buying a private company that had been spun out of some timber land holdings many, many years ago, back in the late 1800s. So that was a private company, and we bought it for its mineral rights. So we had the 250 square miles that covered our first nickel target, which is a thing called the Echo Lake layered intrusion. And we drilled that in 97 and had, again, the dreaded technical success. We had a 5-meter interval there that ran 1.1 grams combined platinum palladium, and it's a big layered intrusion. It was, it's over 10 kilometers long, and it's several kilometers wide, and over a couple kilometers deep, and still no one's ever tested the basal unit of it. So that was really the target, was let's see if there's a big puddle of massive sulfide sitting on the lower contact of this intrusion. And we didn't get that. Our consolation prize was the platinum palladium thing. And then, then Bre-X happened in 98, and that kind of turned off the financing taps. The Eagle mine was discovered by Rio Tinto in the early 2000s. And that's a high-grade conduit-hosted massive sulfide deposit. It's not very big. It's probably between Eagle and Eagle East, only 6 million tons, but very high grade, over 3% nickel combined, and 1.5%, 2% copper. So that discovery in 2002, Rio Tinto drilled 85 meters of massive sulfide in the discovery hole there, and that again brought us back exploring, and then a couple more cycles, and here we are. I picked up the LM property that coincidentally used to be a Rio Tinto property. They drilled it in the mid-90s, in 95. They intersected the right kind of rocks on the LM property, but Rio Tinto went through some budget cuts as well when Kennecott was merged with CRA of Australia. So that property was dropped, picked up by another junior who never did anything with it. And then I was urged to acquire it by an ex-Rio Tinto geologist who'd run the programs in that area in the 2000s. And so in 2014, we acquired the LM property. And the nickel market, had been through the last decade, really, since the 2011 top in the resource markets. Nickel, nobody cared. And so I was looking for a partner for this for about 5 years, and a fellow who does our accounting in the United States and our tax returns in the US, who is a sophisticated investor, a guy who went to PDAC every year, knows the industry, the junior resource thing, which is unique for a US guy, just an accountant, really. He put together a group of his clients last year after looking at it for a couple of years, and here we are. They're our joint venture partners now. They funded the first drill program, which was $285,000 US, which we spent this summer, and we're now in a JV. Bitterroot's 51%, they're 49%, and they're prepared to come up with their 49% of the next phase of drilling, which we hope to start in January. So that project will be, following up these good results, and hopefully we can clip some massive sulfide that the stuff we're looking at on the slide here has been remobilized out of. Or, this tells us that we're close to a larger body of sulfide, probably massive sulfide, and there's a lot more information we have, of course, than just our own drilling, because Rio Tinto drilled roughly 25 holes on their mineral rights within a couple of miles of this property, looking for the same thing, and had lots of encouragement, but they never intersected as big a body of this mafic ultramafic rock as we have intersected. I mean, they were hitting tens of meters of mafic ultramafic feeder zones, whereas we've drilled, 200, almost 260 meter thickness of this rock. So we think we're in the main part of the feeder zone here. Certainly the biggest intrusive body in this immediate area. They tend to be.
Advance the slides and just sort of speak to some of the maps. So.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's the disclaimer. So don't believe anything I say. So here we are in the Upper Peninsula. It's a part of the world a lot of people kind of don't realize it's there, but it's the South Shore of Lake Superior, but it's a chunk of the Canadian Shield of the Superior Province that is separated from the Ontario part by a thing called the Mid-Continent Rift, which wraps around basically Lake Superior sits in it. And one limb goes down into Lower Michigan, where the Michigan Basin oil and gas reserves are, and the other limb goes down the southwest end of Lake Superior into Minnesota and Iowa. And of course, the Duluth complex is in Minnesota, which is a huge low-grade resource. And Rio Tinto's also Tamarack deposit is also in Minnesota near Duluth at the end of the lake. So it's a good location, and I think very prospective geology. The Eagle mine was discovered in 2002. That has turned into a very profitable high-grade mine that Lundin Mining operates, and their website has some great information on Eagle. And that is 100% the exact analog for what it is we're looking for in this part of the world. And Rio Tinto broke trail for everybody, really, in terms of building a modern mine that hadn't been done in this area for decades. And their environmental standards and their community engagement have been, top notch. And Lundin has continued with that. So, there's a good model for us to follow, and the local population, I think, are a lot more in favor of mines than they ever were before, because they've seen the economic benefits, and they understand that the environmental footprint is extremely small, despite all the concerns early on in the project. They've really done a great job on that mine. So the geology of the Baraga Basin, this is a fairly simplistic map, but you can see a syncline here sitting on top of Archean gneiss. So the syncline are Proterozoic rocks, which were deposited about 1.85 billion years ago. Sediments, fine grain shales and greywackies and whatnot. And the formation names here, Lower Slate, Lower Fossum, Upper Fossum, those are Rio Tinto names that they had established through their own drilling. You can see the Eagle deposits, Eagle and Eagle East, at the east end of the syncline. The Roland Lake area farther west is where Rio had drilled 25 holes. The LM property is basically in what you would call the Roland Lake area. It was originally called Loosemore, and we just called it LM so that we took the vendor's name out of the property name, just for in a hope that we go forward and it would be a successful project. Down in the bottom left corner is a thing called BIC, which is another Rio Tinto discovery, which is an acronym for the bovine igneous complex, which is another layered intrusion. These are all 1,100 million year old intrusions, which are the same age as the earliest eruptive events of the Mid-Continent Rift. So they're all representing primitive magmas that came up through sulfur-bearing sediments, and the magmas absorb the sulfur from the sedimentary rocks and the Archean gneisses, and that precipitates out as nickel, copper, and iron sulfides. So Bic would probably be an ore body. It would be mined in any other circumstance except that it was within lands where the local native First Nations or Indian tribes, as they're referred to in the States, it was within what used to be their reservation. So they were not in favor of seeing any mining take place on Bic. But anyway, within 30 kilometers from LM over to Eagle, and another 15 kilometers down to Bic, you've got there's an ore body on each side of us, basically, and we're very encouraged by what we've been seeing here in the Roland Lake area. So this is a Google Earth image with the streams and roads shown on it, and all those red dots are Rio Tinto's drill holes. The whole play got started in the early 90s when Rio Tinto bought about 500 square miles of mineral rights from the Ford Motor Company. Ford used to own all this land up here because the frames of Model Ts were made of hardwood. And so they wanted to be vertically integrated. So Ford had its own logging operations to produce timber to make frames for vehicles. And anyway, in the early 90s, they sold their mineral rights to Rio Tinto, or Kennecott at the time, and as it was known. And Kennecott thought it was an area that was prospective for sediment-hosted zinc deposits, because these black shales in the Baraga Basin are loaded with zinc. The whole area is a huge zinc anomaly. And they went and looked at this gravel pit in the just above the center of the image here, and there were all these high-grade mineralized boulders in it, and I've got a piece of it right here, and there are blebs of chalcopyrite and pentlandite in that, just like was shown in the core on the opening slide. So Kennecott got quite excited about this and started pursuing nickel copper, magmatic nickel copper in the area, which led to the discovery of Eagle and led to the drilling of all these holes. As I said earlier, Rio never intersected more than a few tens of meters at any one time in all of these drill holes of the prospective mafic ultramafic rocks, whereas the LM property, they had drilled 190 meters of the right kind of rocks in 1995, but as I said, they had to drop that particular lease because it was a private lease. It wasn't part of the Ford Motor Company lands.
So assuming a system is intact, thickness of this stuff is pretty important, right? I mean, that's an important factor in terms of what you might be able to find in a magma body.
Well, it tells us that what we're dealing with was a conduit that probably had a large volume of magma flow through it over a relatively long period of time. The Echo Lake intrusion is kind of more like a large static body that was intruded with multiple pulses, but it wasn't like the feeder where all this magma would be passing through and sulfides would be immiscible droplets of sulfide would be settling out. So the size of the intrusion here at LM tells us that it was probably a significant conduit for large volumes of magma, which is where you would expect to see sulfides settling out. This slide is just the same as the previous one with geology superimposed on it, and you know, there were lots of sniffs of of good looking stuff, but they never really got anything. And I would say anything really significant. They had one interval of 30 centimeters of massive chalcopyrite at the base of the sedimentary package on top of the Archean rocks in a magmatic breccia, but our 5.5 meter interval of this disseminated sulfide looks very much like the stuff around Eagle and Eagle East, and I don't believe there was ever anything like that intersected by Rio in this area. And Rio drilled 25 holes here, more than 10,000 meters of drilling. A lot of juniors no junior could ever afford to do that, but Rio generated an awful lot of good information here, and we had the opportunity to review it when we were doing due diligence on purchasing their mineral rights in Michigan. They put them up for sale about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we weren't able to reach a deal with Rio because the price was too high in our view anyway. And but it did give us an opportunity to at least learn more about the geology in the area. And anyway, so here we are, LM. So it's a fairly discrete magnetic anomaly. It's a bullseye magnetic anomaly. So, it was kind of a no-brainer drill target in that sense. As I said earlier, the target is a high-grade, not necessarily large, laterally extensive, but certainly high-grade and high-value deposit. Over in Minnesota, Rio Tinto continues to be involved in the Tamarack deposit, which they also discovered at about the same time. And that is now joint ventured with another company called Talon Metals. And they have a great website, by the way. If you're interested in nickel sulfide deposits, that's a really good quality source of information there. And that company's $150 million market cap. So, Bitterroot's market cap today is 3.5 million Canadian, and so I think any exploration success we have here is it's obvious that there's a great opportunity for a significant re-rate or revaluation based on the other comparables out there. So this was our first hole. As it turned out, we got lucky in our very first drill hole, and but we didn't really know the orientation of the intrusion, so we had to do a bit of fumbling around in the dark with the drilling after we hit this, because the geophysical interpretations were a bit ambiguous, so we didn't know exactly which direction the basal contact was heading. But anyway, this was our first hole, and as I said, disseminated mineralization, which looks almost identical to the mineralized boulders in the Roland Lake gravel pit that were discovered much earlier. Here's the drill intersections. What do we got? Weighted average 5.3 meters at 0.62 copper, 0.58 nickel, a little bit of PGMs. We put the sulfur in there because that is an indication of, it was only 3% sulfur in those assays. So massive sulfide would typically be 35% sulfur. And there are formulas that we've used that were developed by Tony Naldret to back calculate what the tenor of the massive sulfide mineralization would be. And for argument's sake, it's not a whole lot different than just multiplying that sulfur by 10. So they're 10 or 12. So our 0.62 copper and our 0.58 nickel are, there's a range of potential values, but we calculate that massive sulfide should be running around 7% nickel and 8% copper with significant PGMs. And that's more than double the grade at Eagle and Eagle East. So there's something special going on here in this particular area. There was also a thesis done, PhD thesis done on the Roland Lake area, and the geochemical data strongly suggests that this is a dead ringer for the geochemistry of the Eagle intrusions. So there's some really good quality science supporting the validity of these targets. And it's more than just closology here. The geology and geochemistry, isotopes, sulfur isotopes, and things like that are very supportive of there being a high grade potential for a high grade deposit nearby. So here's kind of everything all thrown together. If you look at the top here, we have underneath where it says schematic cross section, the RTP, residual magnetic response. RTP means reduced pole, which is what geophysicists do to make magnetic responses of different ages comparable. Anyway, you can see that's just a profile of the magnetic response. So a mag high with a low, pronounced low on the north side, and the mag high generally coincides perfectly with the subcrop of the intrusion. The intrusion doesn't outcrop here because it's basically dead flat, and there's about 4 or 5 meters of glacial till. Rio Tinto's initial hole was the angle hole cutting across this thing, and it hit mostly olivine gabbro. So that's a mafic rock, not particularly ultramafic. In other words, it wasn't that high in magnesium, but it had significant magnesium in it, which indicated a primitive magma. Also the presence of olivine, that's where most of the magnesium is. So we started out, instead of drilling across the magnetic anomaly, we set up in the peak of it in the center and tried to drill straight down the throat of it. And so there's our first hole, the longest hole that intersected those disseminated sulfides. Hole number 2 was drilled to the north to test a conductive plate that's shown there that was modeled from some borehole EM work. After drilling that hole, it turned out to be a graphite and pyrrhotite-rich horizon. So it was a bit of a red herring. However, it's dipping back towards the intrusion. So it's kind of interesting to speculate about what might be happening when that sulfide-rich bed is in contact with the intrusion, which would be more or less in the general area where I'm showing the massive sulfide target. So the borehole EM didn't work as well as we'd hoped because the entire package of sedimentary rocks that host this intrusion are very, very conductive. Lots of graphite and lots of sulfide in. So good for forming a deposit, not so good for using geophysics to vector in to where to go. Hole 3, after drilling hole 2, I guess the other thing with hole 2 was we got that conductive plate. Okay, we explained that target. We also exited the intrusion quite a bit earlier than we expected to. And hole 3, we thought, okay, we're still not 100% sure where this intrusion is going. So we tried to drill straight down the throat of it in hole 3 in a vertical hole and lost that hole in some bad ground. And then hole number 4, which is right between hole number 2 and 3, was drilled on a slightly different azimuth. These are projected onto one plane here, these holes, but hole number 4 did hit some minor sulfides at the lower contact. And it also confirmed to us which way the intrusion was plunging. Which brings us to today, where now we know where we need to go to test this thing down plunge. And that would be where we expect to see the sulfides. And the other thing that's good here is that the intrusion seems to be flattening, which is a great place for sulfides to accumulate. And I'll show that in a bit here. This is a long section of the Eagle and Eagle East deposits. Eagle on the left is pretty close to surface and kind of a strange shaped blob of massive sulfide there. The purple rocks are the peridotite, so the mafic, ultramafic rocks, just like the ones we're drilling at LM, that host these things. So there's a gap there between that and the Eagle East intrusion, and you can see at depth where that intrusion flattens is where the main Eagle East ore body is. And we appear to be at a much deeper erosional level relative to that flattening. I don't really know why that would be, but it's kind of like if you just cut off the top of Eagle East, the intrusion, and you just look at the lower third of it, that's kind of what the analogy is for what we think we're seeing at LM. These drill holes at Eagle East are 900 to 1,000 meter holes. We're looking at our targets are going to be in the 300 meter range, give or take. So it won't be prohibitively expensive to drill test this thing as well. Yeah, so we think we're in the halo around the massive sulfides, and we like the fact that the intrusion, the base of the intrusion, is flattening, and it could be a really efficient trap for sulfides. We did receive our final geochemical analyses in October. They were more or less what we expected. We do have some ultramafic rocks getting up to around 15–16% magnesium. We've done some thin section work, so we understand a little better the real rock types based on the crystal composition of the rock. And so, I think science-wise, we're in a good position to move forward. We're confident that we're in the right kind of system. We will be forming a joint venture with our local partners below exploration, which is more of a formality than anything. We have some land on the south edge of the LM property that we're well down the road towards acquiring, and it's going slower than I wanted for a variety of reasons, but my goal would be to have that land acquisition taken care of in the next couple of months before we start drilling in January. And that'll give us surface access and a strong position on the mineral rights as well. So we don't really need a lot of money to drill this thing. If we're sharing the expenditures 51-49, we're planning a $400,000 US program, so that's 202 for Bitterroot. In Canadian dollars, 260,000, and we think that'll get us about 8 300-meter holes, or 6 400-meter holes. So that's the plan, is to get back out there in January. The drill rig remained on the property and was winterized, so in theory the crew can just show up and after a day or two get going on drilling.
And this region, really the only periods of the year where you need to really worry about it is hunting season, because you don't want your drills to get shot, and breakup because the roads get kind of mucky. But I mean, let's say for the sake of argument, which of course is my argument since I'm finding a placement, you get lucky and you start hitting stuff here, you've got lots of runway before you have to worry about getting out of there for spring breakup. And I assume the guys that you're dealing with on the other side, you obviously know these guys. There's unwritten, if not a written thing, they're going like, look, if we're hitting, like, get out your checkbooks, guys, because I mean you're going to be raising enough here that you can keep going. So presumably they've gotten that word too, and they're guys that can do that easily enough. Yeah,
the initially we'd probably want to be out of the bush by mid-March. 15th, 20th of March is historically when breakup starts. It lasts for a couple months, so mid-May you're back in there, and then hunting season September 15 to December 15. So The Again, as you said, there are ways around that. We can extend our drilling season simply by looking after some of the people and giving them a reason to let us keep drilling. And
Right.
I don't see that as being a large financial cost to the program. If it needs to happen, it won't cost much extra. So it's all road access. My guys, the drillers, live in town in a motel. They're perfectly good rooms for $75 a night, kind of thing. It's exploration doesn't get much cheaper than this in North America.
Okay, and essentially what you're looking for here is you're going down plunge where it appears this conduit's flattening, and essentially, obviously you're hoping to hit semi-massive or massive sulfides. And if you tag that, then you basically just start drilling around that hole to try to figure out what the geometry of the conduit is.
Yeah, there are other geophysical techniques we can use, once we know where we are and where the massive sulfide, if we get a hit, you could do more borehole EM. And there's also a type of survey called mise à la masse, where you would go down your drill hole and energize your massive sulfide body, and then you can take measurements on surface and basically map it out. So between that technique and the conventional borehole EM techniques and all the computer modeling that can be done now, we would be able to follow it. And of course, the drilling, these things don't have to be very big to be very valuable. So your step outs aren't going to be huge. We won't be stepping out kilometers or anything like that. We'll be stepping out 50 meters initially, but you're going to add a lot of tons in value in a very small area quickly.
I would think Lundine's a pretty obvious end game if you find something. You're not very far away. You're like, what, 20 kilometers or something like that?
Yeah, we're 30 kilometers from the Eagle mine. There's no road actually directly linking those two places, but Eagle trucks their ore about 105 kilometers to a mill.
Right.
That was a pre-existing mill that was process and an open pit that it was an iron ore deposit, and that had been shut down for many years. But they set up on that brownfield site and rehabilitated the old mill, basically rebuilt it to process Eagle ore, and they're dumping their tailings into the old open pit underwater, which is subaqueous. So that minimizes the ability for generating acid and affecting the environment. So environmentally, it's a great solution. And ironically, the LM property is about 5 kilometers closer to the mill than the Eagle deposit is. So there's an obvious place to send the ore, put it that way.
Right. Okay. And the financing that you're doing, which isn't huge. I think it's around 700. Although, I think you probably go over it a little bit anyway, if the fund showed up. So I'm not too worried about allocations here. That amount, I know it includes some work on your Southwest US stuff. That would come after this drilling, but you want to just give us like a quick overview on what you're going to do on those other projects?
Sure. Do we have a method of bringing up those other slide decks, or shall we just talk about it?
You can talk about them, but you can also open those decks and just do the same thing that you did here.
Yeah. Okay. How do we do that?
I can actually look and see if I can.
Okay. I think I just figured that out. It's just
Are those in PowerPoint or in PDF?
those are PDFs again.
Okay.
Oops.
I don't know if I have them, or at least I don't know if I have them saved on my machine. Take a look.
There's Castle. Can you see that, Eric?
See, just like, let me get out of my thing here.
Yeah. There it is.
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
Good. And
Just maximize the view.
right. Oh, I guess I had.
There you go. That works.
Okay. Well, sorry to the viewers here. I'm a little challenged on this. I'm learning. What happened to me?
You're still, I can see you. I don't know whether.
I can't see you. I can't see me. I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, well, let's just the heck with it. Let's just look at this slide deck.
I can see you on my screen, and it's recording on my computer. So.
Okay, perfect. So this project is just about 50 kilometers north of Elko, Nevada.
Right.
So at the Tuscarora is across the valley. You're at the southern end of the Independence Trend, which has Jarrett Canyon, and we're just a few tens of kilometers northeast of the Carlin Trend. This is a epithermal gold deposit that was brought to me by Rick Strife, who is our qualified person for Nevada. And Rick is a geologist that worked many years for Newmont and also worked for Oceana Gold in New Zealand and Newmont at the Waihi Gold Deposit, which is an classic epithermal hot spring type gold deposit. And he was very successful finding more ore, and they really liked this project because the sinter at the surface is fully preserved, which means you got the entire hot spring system preserved in a great, easily accessible location. Here's the sinter at surface, and the whole system is, like I said, seems to be there. It's not smashed up or moved around or rotated. You've got a lot of, the Pathfinder elements on surface: arsenic, antimony, mercury. And the previous drilling did not test the optimum depth in the system. These things are very much driven by elevation and hydrostatic pressure. So as water comes up the fault zone, the heated water, as the pressure is released, as it rises through the crust, it boils at about 200 to 400 meters below surface. And the boiling area is where the gold and silver are deposited. And Chevron did some drilling. These are just sort of schematics here, just to kind of give you a sense for the general depth of that they tested. And Chevron drilled some 4 holes at surface, which had highly anomalous geochemistry and a little bit of gold, but not ore grade by any stretch, but indicated we're in the right type of system. Radius did some more drilling with reverse circulation holes. Their holes their deepest hole barely got to 200 meters. And those holes were not surveyed. So reverse circulation holes are known for their ability to deviate. And so we're not 100% sure where those holes ended up, to be honest with you, but we know that none of them could have gone deeper than 200 meters. So our plan is to do a geophysical survey called a CSAMT, which is very commonly used in epithermal environments. It's controlled source audio magnetotellurics is what it's called, but what it basically does is map structures for you at depth. And Rick has used that technique quite effectively in New Zealand at Waihi and found a lot of ounces. He's found over 1 million ounces of gold for Oceania, following up on those kind of targets. So what we're planning here is relatively simple. Do a CSAMT survey and then follow up with some drilling off existing roads. We're in the process of permitting that drill program right now. It's on BLM land, so it's not a complicated procedure. And I would expect to be in a position to have the CSAMT done next spring, probably, let's call it March, April, and then we're ready to drill test this and hopefully intersect some high-grade mineralization at the appropriate depth, because this is the right kind of system. Oceania brought an expert on sinters over from New Zealand to map this, and one of the key things, which it doesn't really show up very well on this slide at all, unfortunately, but there's stibnite crystals, which stibnite is an antimony mineral, and the presence of those stibnite crystals is usually very indicative of a system that is mineralized at depth. So not only do we have the right geochemistry, but we have the right mineralogy here and the right kind of sinter. So I guess this slide just repeats what I just said. The previous drilling was was all too shallow to adequately test the target, and we'll be doing core drilling, oriented core drilling, which is a little more expensive than RC, well, significantly more expensive than RC, but it allows you to map get structural information, which is really the key to finding where these things are. These slides are just showing soil sampling from previous work that the vendor had that, we've got golden soils here. So weakly anomalous, but that's kind of normal for this type of thing. When we get into the antimony, we're getting much more anomalous antimony and arsenic the same. And they're all basically coincident. They're happening in the same place. We've got one structure there in blue that was what Chevron targeted. It's sort of trending north-northeast, and there's a valley cutting sort of northwest-southeast, just south of the main sinter outcrops, that we think might be a structure also. But the CSAMT will give us a much better idea of what structural targets we have here at depth. So again, this is not a complicated story. It's not a complicated exploration target. It's just a little bit of geophysics and point of drill at some of these the features that we identify. The geological mapping can happen fairly quickly during the geophysics as well. It's not a big property, and as I said, the permitting is ongoing right now. So we'll have the permits in hand from the BLM before the end of the year, I would expect.
And the third project, just to go through it like super quick, what's the plan for the third project?
The castle property is a gold property down near Tonopah, and it's a very impressive property. There's this massive amount of intensely altered volcanic rock with these big silicified ribs tracking through it. And we optioned this one for Mealy Gold. Here's a map showing the relative location there. Coyote Center up at the top near Elko, the Castle property down near Tonopah. It's in the Walker Lane, which has a lot of epithermal deposits, big ones like Comstock and Round Mountain, Tonopah. So a very prolific trend. And we've got a big, there you can sort of see it at an oblique angle here, this argillic alteration zone. It was a sponge that absorbed the hydrothermal fluids that were coming up the main feeder structures. And we think that these silicified ribs are occurring on those structures. And again, it's a matter of targeting the appropriate depth. Kinross drilled a lot of holes in all that altered rock, looking for another Round Mountain type deposit, large, low-grade, open pittable scenario. And they drilled a lot of gold, low grade though, you know, sort of 0.1 to 0.25 grams per ton, extensive throughout this whole area, but none of it was ore. And so they walked away and never went after the higher grade feeder zones. So the model here is a thing in Japan called Hishikari, where the mineralization occurs underneath in the basically in the basement rocks underneath these volcanic tuffs. So you can see some old workings there. The alteration and the silicified ribs kind of stand up and form cliffs. There's another one tracking across. They're quartz carbonate veins basically, and they of course are anomalous in gold silver, but not ore grade. Here's the basement rocks, what's known as the Palmetto Formation, and it is silicified also on the property. So the unconformity between these two rock types is basically occurring in the valley bottom. So it's not a deep target. And a nice simplified cartoon here showing what our target is, and you know the gold veins. And Hishikari is a wonderful deposit because the grades are in the 40 to 50 grams per ton range in these veins. So very high grade. And when I put, you know, when I basically try and show or put the elements of Castle on top of the Hishikari conceptual model, and so we have the silicified ribs, the altered volcanic package, and then the main mineralized veins are at depth, just in the basement, in the upper part of the basement, or in the lower part of the volcanic pile. And that's because of lithostatic pressure or hydrostatic pressure. You get a boiling event taking place as these pressurized fluids enter the volcanics. So again, it's not a big it's not necessarily a huge target, but there's potential to put a lot of ounces in a very small area. The mineralized units shown in this stratigraphic column are ones that were identified by Kinross. So there's, you know, hundreds of meters of volcanic stratigraphy tuffs and flows that are weakly mineralized and highly altered, but nobody's ever tested that basal unconformity with the palmetto for the Hishikari type stuff. So that's again being permitted right now, and we have great access. We don't need to drill a lot of holes to see if the model makes sense. So it's I like to call this and Coyote, well, and LM for that matter, it's low cost, high impact exploration. Because if you're right and the grades are there, you know, your access to capital is going to be very good, and your ability to put together a lot of ounces or pounds of nickel copper in a small area is also there.
So you kind of know where you want to go here. It's just a matter of drilling the holes, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's room for some more geological mapping and some more sampling, but the property's been, we've had I've had Rick Strife and one of his other geologists on the property doing mapping and sampling, and we could do a little bit more work, but the main focus on this will be to get a drill rig in here, and ideally we'd do that perhaps around the Coyote property drilling as well. So drill them both around the same time, one after the other.
Well, there you have it, folks. Basically, this financing will get a drill onto LM, which I think has the most immediate, not just time-wise, but has the most immediate potential if the drilling works. Good, high-grade copper nickel finds are very rare. You don't see many of them. There's been a couple of them in the last few years in Australia, and the market jumped all over them. They tend to get a lot of market cap very fast if you hit these kind of holes. And to back that up, you've got a couple of drill programs that'll follow up in Nevada later. So it's kind of a three-pronged deal. Very low market cap right now, $3.5 million. I like the risk reward given the valuation. I think it's got a pretty good shot, and that's why I'm writing a check to keep it simple. And that's about it. I mean, it's a story. I'll get this formatted off to you guys. I will load up the 3 decks you just saw, so you can have a chance to go through all of them. I know this is a pretty long Zoom call as these things go, so I don't want to stretch it out longer. So I'll just call it right here: Bitterroot Resources, BTT on the venture. You got what, 50 million shares out, give or take, right now?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe I know you just exercised what, 1.4, I think it was, million warrants to put some cash in the kitty just like a week or two ago.
Yeah, that's right. I'm at this point, I own more of the stock than I ever have in my life in terms of percentage basis. So just
Right.
just over 15% right now. And these targets that we have, I'll be honest with you, I think we've got the best suite of properties in the company right now that we've ever had in terms of the potential to make a discovery. So fingers crossed, and we'll get the drills turning early next year.
Okay, sounds good. I'll leave it there, and thanks folks for being HRA insiders, and you'll hear from me again soon.